Welcome back to the Wolverine.com podcast. I'm John Borton here with one of our absolute favorites, Tom Crawford, our guy in East Lansing. Tom, it's good to have you back. Happy 2022 to you, and we'll see what's going on in the world of both Michigan football and basketball today. But there's never any lack of developments, obviously.
No, there's not. And when you lose a D-line coach, Sean Noah has the USC today. Piles on to the debacle last night in basketball, and I texted you about what I'd heard about with the five players not playing, and we knew where that was headed. And then obviously what happened between the lines at the Orange Bowl. But let me say this about my quick trip to Miami and Miami Gardens and back in the Orange Bowl and the incredible presence of Michigan fans in the Orange Lot there throughout the entire stadium. I was at a donors party before the game. Man, the passion for Michigan football is off the friggin' scale. I will say that. So that's my biggest takeaway from Miami, and 2022 is going to be even better. And I think Michigan football is indeed back.
Well, okay, let's start with football. I was thinking about starting with basketball, but you've got me,
We have to.
fired up right now. I know that you had a different way. You drove down there with some
Yes.
friends, and that had to be in itself quite the excursion.
Well, we try to do a flashback to spring break. We drove down the A1A in Fort Lauderdale. For the millennials, they won't relate to this as as a college retreat, but went down memory lane, ran into some people down there, had a great tailgate party, and then that pre-party. It's who you hang around with that gives you opportunities. Let me give you that little side note. But anyway, no, it was good. I mean, we had the costs, and then obviously the cancellation of flights. We rented a car and drove down, and we went down 95 on one way and the 75 in the back, did a loop, and different background, and no problems at all. And we still got it. We still got that spring break fashion, and we didn't drive through. We stayed overnight, but it was a lot of fun. And like I said, I have absolutely no regrets going to this. I was not going to hesitate. I wasn't hesitating going to the CFP opportunity for Michigan. We've been waiting so long, John, and I
Sure.
would do it again in a heartbeat. I'll even
Yeah.
go to another bowl game in a heartbeat. As a fan, it's just so much fun. So much fun.
Well, I'm very glad you weren't on 95 yesterday.
No.
I'll say that right now. But when you talk about making that trip, how difficult was it to invest that amount of time and emotional energy and everything else, and then you're sitting there and it gets out of hand so quickly? It seemed like.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I'm looking around, and I would say it's 60 to 65% from my perspective. And I was kind of like in the heart of the Michigan section of Michigan fans over Georgia fans. It's like Georgia fans, are they waiting for the championship game in Indianapolis, saving their money? But I you know we talked about this a couple times on this podcast. My greatest fear, and I said this on a couple of radio shows. My greatest fear was when Georgia had the ball, moving on Michigan's defense early on, and to see what the whole optics of it was going to be. And right out of the chute, they started moving the ball. They had a 9-yard run on the first play, and all of a sudden, the short passing game went out there. Came, that came into play. The swing passes, the bubbles, and then hitting Bauer, the big tight end, who is Rob Gronkowski times 10 somewhere down the line. He's going to be a Hall of Famer if he stays healthy. Brock Bowers. I was just like, wow. It was like, so this is how it's going to be. My greatest fear. And then offensively, my other fear is the lack of flicker foot ability, I will call it, of Cade McNamara was going to come into play, and that certainly did. I thought he threw some nice balls, but the J.J. McCarthy equation that I've been pushing for all along is really was needed earlier than the entire fourth quarter. I mean, that switch should have been made at halftime to give Michigan any kind of fighting chance. Anyway, we'll see what happens next year on that thing. But those are the two things that stood out. So yeah, it was acceptance. I mean, at 14-0, I think all of us knew this was not going to end up good.
Right. The quarterback question has been one major argument after that game. The second has been basically its style. They should have coached that game differently. They should have approached it differently. They need a higher level of deep passing game. All of that versus, look, you lost to the better team. I tend to fall on the latter. I think styles can change and you can play various styles. And Michigan did this year, heavy run early, and then they opened it up and had a ton of explosive plays. But I just think that was an overwhelmingly talented Georgia team, more so than Michigan on both lines. And they successfully negated the impact of Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo because they were consistently in second and short or third and short, those sorts of situations. I mean, to me, it came down to talent.
No, I agree totally with you. And I've seen in person now Michigan lose to two great defensive lines. One with both in Miami. The old Orange Bowl in '76 when Michigan lost to the Selman brothers. I mean, it was just like glaring. I mean, those guys are like cartoon-like guys, eating up on Michigan's offensive line. And the same thing happened in this game. It was, just so much speed. Let's go. I mean, I know people don't like to do this, get caught up. Oh, you got more talent, blah, blah. But blatantly, come on, think about this, JB, when you think of 17 5-stars Georgia has, Michigan 2. They have 49 4-stars. Michigan has 39. Okay. That's going to come into play. I'm sorry. 5-stars are 5-stars. And at these skill positions. And then they get their wide receiver back, who, obviously said, hello to Dax Hill. We saw that clip. It's just, it was glaring, the disparity in athleticism in the trenches, especially in that D line. I thought that was, and the other thing, I'm going to go back to the first part you're talking about, what Michigan could have done maybe strategically, is I thought they would attack the secondary. I mean, that's the only fighting chance they had. And I'm not saying that Georgia's secondary is like as bad as Michigan State's. I'm not even going to begin to take it to that level. However, that was the only shot Michigan had was to somehow get some, even if you have to roll out the quarterback and J.J. McCarthy, to get some kind of aerial game going, some kind of rhythm going, because it was not going to happen between the tackles as far as the running game with that D line that Georgia has.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say to that is you need time to throw. They didn't have much time to throw.
But you roll them out, then you roll them out. This is what Michigan State did with Dan Enos back in I'll go back historically. When they had no offensive line, they ran Dan Enos out. That's how they beat Michigan in 1990. When you don't have a guy, you don't have protection here. You roll them out, and that's where JJ could have done that.
Well, and what I would say to JJ is when you're rolling out next year, get the heck down on the turf faster. Because he absorbed a couple of shots. And,
I know he did.
That in typical fashion, if you're trying to do that for a whole game, you're not going to last the game. So I think he'll learn from that. But style of play is, we can have that debate all day long. I contend that Michigan's style of play was plenty good enough to win a Big Ten championship,
yes,
to take down Ohio State, to do what they needed to do. And I think more than style of play, to take that next jump to beat the best two teams in the country right now, which obviously Georgia and Alabama, I think NIL is a bigger factor than style of play.
Oh, I agree totally with you. I'm glad you brought that up, because I know, the Harbaugh run, we go through this every year. Song and dance about Harbaugh leaving for the NFL. But if indeed it is a situation where Jim Harbaugh is going to try to negotiate for the betterment of his program in terms of compensation of assistant coaches and the NIL pot, if you will, a la Texas, that was flipping recruits on NIL alone without the kids even being on campus, let alone A&M, let alone Ohio State. That's what it's going to take. I mean, I'm sorry, they're going to need more talent. I mean, you nailed it. This is good enough to win a Big Ten, and also Cade McNamara is a quarterback good enough to win a Big Ten. He's not good enough to win a national championship with his skill set, in my opinion.
All right. Well, we'll save that discussion for another day.
Spring ball.
We may disagree on that because I saw Brian Greasy, get it done. And Cade reminded me a lot of him. But you mentioned Harbaugh. I want to shift to Jim Harbaugh. Obviously, we're hearing that he has some NFL interest. That's good on the one hand, because I guarantee you, last winter he didn't have NFL interest. No. But the resurrection of Michigan football has renewed that, and you're going to have guys coming after him. Do you think that after one successful season, after a breakthrough, that the NFL could be enough to interest him? I would be surprised, but then again, I've been surprised before.
I would be surprised, and I think he feels good about what this team has accomplished and this program's had. I think he wants more, and I think it's been clear that when you start connecting dots on comments like "I do this job for free," I actually believe him when he says that. And how much money do you really need? And I know the NFL would have had interest in Jim Harbaugh last year. I mean, that's just reality. Hey, Jim Harbaugh's got a job for the rest of his life. How long in the NFL? That's given. But I still think he wants to figure out the final pieces of this puzzle to get it all done right, and to get to the CFP and to potentially get to the title game and potentially win a national championship. And I think this NIL thing truly is that element. I really, really do. And I think what's happened, especially when you're dealing with the transfer portals and things like that, plucking guys, and then what the early signing period, those NILs that I mentioned about that are dancing all over the place, like there's no credence for Texas to land these cats. And I know what A&M can do. I listen, I covered the Southwest Conference when A&M and Texas, and I know how much money is down there. Michigan's got money. Michigan has a lucrative alumni base. Trust me, they're as high end as you can get. And it's there. It's all there. And I'm hoping that's what's involved with this, what will be involved with this when Ward Manuel restructures Jim Harbaugh's contract, that it's for the betterment of the program, not the betterment of Jim Harbaugh.
So I would agree. And I think that would be a key element even for Jim Harbaugh. I mean, more than just personal enrichment, he wants to know that he can compete and succeed. And the greatest way that Michigan can compete with the Georgias and Alabamas and even Ohio States on a regular basis of this world is to get on more level playing ground when it comes to player procurement, and that's all about NIL. You mentioned Sean Nua on his way to USC. We've seen those reports. How important is it to keep most of this staff in place after such a good year?
Well, I know for a fact that Jim Harbaugh doesn't resist turnover. In fact, quite honestly, he embraces it. But I think you have to have turnover that's at a has a cadence to it where you're at least going to stay 2 or 3 years before they book out. When I'm having a new DC every year, for example, and I'm not using that as an example with Michigan, but you have to get a little more stability, in my opinion. But with Sean, I mean, the guy's a West Coast guy. This Lincoln Riley is I tell you what, USC. You talk about a brand. That thing's going to take off like a rocket ship. You watch what happens at USC, because that's as explosive in terms of getting from L's to W as much as anybody. And so that did not surprise me. Sharon Moore, I hope he stays. I'm telling you what. Now that one would get my attention. That would start to like one of those I don't want this going on thing.
Yeah.
And so, in my cart, obviously, and I hope that if as long as everything else stays stable on that staff, I think Michigan is just fine.
Well, and I think along with the guys that you mentioned, Steve Clinkscale and
Yes,
Ron Bellamy, and in particular Mike McDonald, you would love to see him stay and really get things established. He made some adjustments this year. He got used to calling the shots in the college games. I think that would, I mean, and there's some head coach material down the line for some of these guys. You would like to see them get a little more steeped in Michigan and this program, so that when Jim Harbaugh does move on, hang it up, whatever, you could be reasonably comfortable in perhaps plucking somebody from your own staff, and that would be allowable if you consistently had the sorts of years that you had this year.
absolutely. Another good point. A year ago, I think all of us were like on the Harbaugh thing, like, okay, hey, listen, if the dude wants to go, let him go. Okay. But now I want him to stay because I think he has improved himself incredibly well. He's done self-improvement. He's done self-scouting as a coach. He's changed his ways and he's got a younger staff. So I would be disappointed if he leaves. I hope he stays. And I hope and I hope Mike Hart. I'm glad you brought Mike Hart up in those name drops there because I think down the road he could be Jim Harbaugh's replacement. I don't know, 5, 6 years or whatever. I don't know how long Harbaugh wants to coach, but I'd like to see Mike Hart in there as head coach. I know he's a position coach. I know he's a running backs coach, and he doesn't have coordinator. Because I don't necessarily think that is a requirement because he's so involved in the program. He did a great job at Indiana with Tom Allen, and I just think that's the target for me. But I hope. But bottom line, I hope Harbaugh stays, and I'll be really disappointed if he takes off.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep a very close eye on that. We should know sooner rather than later, I would think, because recruiting is and keeping a class, uh, finishing it off, I would say, before February is very important. They could make some additions, but Ward Manuel is going to want to get that cleared away very quickly. I would think Jim Harbaugh would as well. So we'll see what happens there. Hard shift to basketball here.
Oh
Very,
no, do we
very
have to?
well. We do. Tough road game against Rutgers last night, and it Michigan just dug a hole and couldn't climb out. Credit to you. You tumbled early onto the fact that they were going to be without all of their roster, and in this game, I don't know how much of a difference that made because you had talent on the floor that could have gotten this done, but we continually see the defensive breakdowns. Last night they threw in a lot of missed layups. I mean, that was a weird development. It's one thing when you're not hitting threes, but when you're missing point blank, that's a problem.
I go back to okay, who are the missing parts from last year that we missed the most? Is what I always ask. I get in conversations with people, and Franz Wagner, as well as he's done in the NBA, that's obviously a name that sticks out. I go with Isaiah Livers. Now I know Isaiah was injured a lot, but I'm telling you what, in that transition D, whether it had to do with the fast break, the secondary break, or even just a loose kind of setup where the opposition was setting up. Michigan has impossibility of finding out who's open. I mean, they're trying to track down who the ball is. We saw this in the Central Florida game, which I watched down in Miami. They can't figure out who's got the ball. It is a Chinese fire drill, and I am really frustrated with that situation because that's where Livers was so good as being the orchestra leader of making sure everybody was in where they're checking who they were supposed to check. And Ron Harper Jr., you're making him look like Michael Jordan at times. I mean, and those threes were going in, and this is going to be an absolute nightmare if this doesn't change dramatically. Out of the Adrian Nunez, that clip of him standing at the free throw line, like just hanging out, and all of a sudden not boxing out. I mean, this was Adrian Nunez's opportunity. My God, you got quality minutes, and the clips were just hair pulling. the optics last night in this game, John, I can't, I don't need me nervous, or negative Nelly here or whatever, or negative Nick or whatever you want to call it. That was a bad basketball team last night, and they got to right this ship real quick, or
You
they're
know,
going to win 6 or 8 games in the Big Ten at most.
right. You know, the optic that is most telling for me is watch closely the leaders on this team, the obvious identified leaders on this team, Eli Brooks and Hunter Dickinson, and you see a definite level of frustration in their reactions to some situations. Not that they're, throwing teammates under the bus in terms of how they're carrying themselves, but you can see it. You can see the. I almost wonder if they think at times, "Wow, I came back for this." Um,
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. It's funny you say that. I thought the same thing. That's almost like the expression that Hunter Dickinson has on his face. What was I thinking? You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
that's the way he looked, the optic. And I'm going to tell you when it looked more glaring than in that North Carolina game. That North Carolina game down in Chapel Hill told me this dude's not invested in coming back. Just the expressions. And then how about the Central Florida game? He took one shot in the last 12 minutes. Now that's not totally on people getting him the ball. He's got to put himself in position to get the ball. And I thought he played better, but and then the situation, with Caleb Houston, that one's been a head scratcher from the first game. And I don't know how Juwan is going to fix that. But let me tell you something. I still believe in Juwan Howard. I am totally into Juwan Howard. You might think that's funny for me to say that after all that,
no, I
but
don't.
I think he's going to fix it. I really, really, maybe not. Maybe they might not make the tournament. They probably won't make the tournament this year. But I think in the long run, he's the answer for this program.
Yeah, and I would agree. You anticipated my thought in bringing that up because I'm still watching him, seeing him consistently teaching every play, putting everything into it. You might not agree with the way things are working out, or even some of the moves he's making in terms of lineups and substitutions and all that. But the fact of the matter is, he is very invested. He is teaching all the time, and he's not throwing these guys under the bus in press conferences and all that. He is saying, "Look, we're learning. We've got to learn to win. We've got to learn to close out games, and we're going to do that eventually." He's still upbeat. He's not one of these coaches who is saying, "Man, what are they doing to me? Why?" Like it's some personal burden on him that the players are thrusting upon him. He is taking ownership and saying, "We're going to get this fixed." It's going to be tough to fix in the next 3 games because you've got Michigan State and Purdue and Illinois, and I believe a week or two ago you said if they could go 1-2 in that stretch, that might be a win. I think that's going to be a tall order at this point.
Well, it's going to be a tall order if they put forth the effort that they put forth in boxing out or lack thereof against Rutgers. This is, if they're going to get beat, that's fine. But what I think fans and obviously critiquing media don't have any patience for are teams that lack effort. I thought if you watch that game in its entirety again, and I'm going to watch it. I taped it. I just want to take a look at it again. Okay, there were countless times lack of effort boxing out. I thought that on where the ball just lands on the floor and all of a sudden there's frozen feet around, and then Rutgers ends up with a 50-50 ball. I don't have any patience for teams that don't put forth effort. I will be shocked if they don't put forth effort at 2:30 on Saturday against Michigan State. My God, if you go in there and you have a lackluster performance like that in terms of lack of effort, you're going to get run out of the gym. It's going to be like 2001 all over again, where all of a sudden you look up and it's 38-9. And I remember that game vividly.
Tom
Where
Izzo does not. He doesn't pass on opportunities to bury Michigan. and he
Oh, he
probably
won't.
sees
No.
this as an opportunity.
No, and
So,
and and that means that defense has to get back because Michigan State will push the basketball off the made basket. When Michigan happens to make a basket, they're going to be pushing, 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 and they're going to have to get back on D, and that's where this thing could get out of hand real quick. And so that's where someone's going to have to take that Isaiah Livers role of directing that defense in the transition D, or else it's going to get ugly real quick.
yeah. Tom Crawford, great job as always. We will be doing this throughout the winter, and you're the hope would be among our listeners that this Michigan basketball team can begin to pull it together and show some forward progress. But we'll be following all the developments with basketball and football. Thanks again for being with us today.
I'm keeping the faith, JP, and Happy New Year to all the listeners on the Wolverine podcast. Look forward to the next opportunity.